Candle magic, sigil magic, sympathetic magic, not magic. What's your favorite type of magic? There are so many different types to choose from, so how is a witch or magical practitioner supposed to know which one is best? Well, if you've been wondering a similar question, then you're in luck because tonight's episode, I'm going to be talking all about the different types of magic and how you can use them during your spell work and your magical rituals. So, Merry Meet, I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin, and welcome to those who are joining us live. So, we have a lot to talk about tonight, and we're going to dive right in, talking all about different types of magic. And hopefully, after tonight's episode, you'll have a better idea. You may learn about ones you didn't even know about, or you'll at least will be able to elaborate on ones you've been wondering about. And hopefully, it will help you decide which type of magic is right for you. So, Merry Meet, welcome. I'm saying hi to those in the chat. Hi, Kurt. I see a few joining us. So I'm just going to dive right in and just start with a general definition of magic. I'm actually going to start with Aleister Crowley's definition because he said that magic is the science and the art of causing change in conformity with the will. And so, in his opinion, this included ordinary acts of will as well as ritual magic. So, what that means is that Crowley believed that a person could actually change, could actually affect change in this world simply through directing their will in the right place. And it didn't actually have anything to do, doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with the trappings of traditional magic. Now, what this suggests is that our thoughts, our energy itself can change things, right? Can affect change within. He spelled magic with a K at the end, and this was to differentiate it between that of parlor magic or stage magic or the magic that would be used in like fantasy novels and movies of the time. Those who practice magic as witches will often differentiate their magic with that K as well. So, if anybody's ever been wondering why magic is spelled with a K at the end, there's your answer. Now, this is not, at least in Crowley's opinion, this is not about cultivating supernatural powers. Instead, it's about aligning oneself with the natural forces around them that helps them manifest their intention. Now, when it comes to that alignment, this is where our shadow work, our energy work can come in. It helps us align our mind and our body to a receptive state where we can create magic. Also, various ritual techniques that we use can also allow us to alter our state of consciousness, which can make us more receptive to magic, to divinity, to the spirits and the energy around us. Now, techniques that can change our consciousness can include breath work, certain different breath work patterns, or suspending the breath, meditative techniques, dance, ecstatic movement, herbs, incense. These are just a few of the different ways that we can alter our consciousness. And while magic can simply just be aligning your thoughts with a specific intention, many witches prefer to have something physical that to do when they are performing their spells and rituals. So that's what we're going to spend the majority of tonight talking about, starting with the word catalyst. A catalyst is something that we essentially bring into our magic to help us accentuate the intentions that we have. Now, catalysts can be just about anything: colors, shapes, other types of energies that boost the magical resonance that we have within the magical working that we're doing. So, for example, let's say a person was going to perform a love spell, they could bring in certain colors into their magic, right? They could bring in pink and red candles. They could even bring in the color green, which is sometimes strange for people who are when they're thinking about love magic, but green is the color of the heart chakra. So that would be a very appropriate color for love magic. They might bring in certain shapes, like the heart, like a shape of the heart, for example. They might bring in herbs like rose, lang lang, jasmine, different herbs that are aligned to that intention of love. Now, through these catalysts, which hold energy of their own, we then enhance the intention of our own spell work. Now, there are different types of magic which will use different types of catalysts. And what we're going to see here as we start to go through the different types of magic, what we're going to notice is that some of these types of magic are actually catalysts in and of themselves. And other types of magic seem to use the catalysts within their practice. So you'll still understand what I mean when we get into it. So the very first one I'm going to talk about is cord magic. Now, cord magic and knot magic, we'll talk about both of those tonight. Cord magic and knot magic is a type of magic that I personally very much like. And my hope with this episode tonight is those who are, maybe you're already someone who does a lot of magical practice and rituals and spells, and you're looking for some new ideas. So I hope you'll find some tonight. And other people may be very new to this. And I get a lot of people asking me questions about how could I make a spell? How, if I have this intention, what would I do? And so my hope is that you'll find something here tonight that resonates with you. Now, cord magic and knot magic is one of my personal favorites. It's one that I when I first started my magical practice, which was like at this point nearly 28 years ago, this was my preferred form of magic. Now, in cord and knot magic, we typically are going to weave together ribbons, cords, string, yarn, and braid those together. And so I'm going to show, this is one example, the witch's ladder. Now, those who are in our coven have done these before, at least in our in-person coven. Every lunaza, we make a witch's ladder. Essentially, this is 3 cords, in this case, it's yarn, that has been woven together, braided together. And in this particular witch's ladder, I've then strung some little symbols here. So we have a symbol of a pentacle, a chalice, a broom, an athame. There's a little cauldron. We have a little goddess charm. These charms, and since I made it, I'll explain. These were all meant to bring in the energies of the different elements and then also the energy of the goddess. Now, when cord magic and knot magic is done, typically as it is being made, so as you're braiding it or you're knotting it, you would be infusing it with your intention, which means that it's kind of important to get into a meditative state where you can really concentrate and focus on your intention as though you're braiding that intention into the braid. Afterwards, these can be charged in a ritual or a magical circle. I personally like to hang these around the house. Witches' ladders are very good for abundance, but they can be charged with any type of intention. Now, if you were making a witch's ladder, you'd want to put something on the end so you could hang it. But another way that a person could use cord magic is, and this is how I used to do it when I was first starting out, is I would make little bracelets out of it or a necklace. And so that way you can wear the cord with you and you're carrying the intention with you as you go. So you could just basically tie that onto your wrist, tie that around your neck, carry it in your purse or your bag. So it's a really accessible, easy form of magic. And what I love about it, especially the braided magic, is that because it's going to take a while, it probably takes a good 20 or so minutes to make yourself a nice braid. All of that entire time, you're spent focused on your intention, which to me is probably the most important part of this spell. There's just a lot of focus, right? Now, another type of magic that can also be used that's kind of similar is the knot magic. Knot magic is quite a bit simpler. You would take one piece of rope or ribbon or cord or string or yarn, and then what you do is you will tie knots into it at various places. Traditionally, it would be 9 knots that would be tied into the cord, and with each knot that is tied, you focus your intention. So again, it's a focus like it is with the witch's ladder. And you might say an incantation as you do so, or something about your intention. And then afterwards, you can hang it as well. You can carry it with you. Sometimes people will burn these to kind of send their magic out into the universe. They could be buried. One thing about knot and cord magic too is that if you ever want to undo it, it's very easy because you'll just undo the braid. So if you ever made, let's say you did a spell and you decided you wanted to reverse that, you would just untie it or unbraid it. If you were doing knot magic and you decided you wanted to reverse that, you would just undo the knots. So very accessible form of magic. And then this helps us segue into color magic. So a word about color, color magic is in and of itself a form of magic, but you can use color in many of these other types of magic. So we'll see that in candle magic. Color magic is a big part of that. Color magic can also be a big part of our cords and our knots that we're tying because we can choose colors that align to our intention. This is a prosperity, abundance witch's ladder. Hence the colors are green. I'm sorry, my allergies have been so bad. So hopefully that will stop in a second. Sorry about that. Okay. So kind of segueing into our color magic, let's say that we were going to we wanted to do an intention of love or compassion. So we might choose the color pink or red, right? If we wanted to do a spell of luck or wisdom, a way to connect to to spirit, the spirit element, or spirits around us, contact spirits, we might use the color purple. If we wanted to bring in peace, harmony, we might bring in the color blue. If we wanted prosperity, abundance, like my witch's ladder was, or an intention of healing, then we might bring in the color green. So color can be used in such a wide variety of ways, and it tends to lend itself to these other forms of magic. So we're going to now move into candle magic because it's another form of magic that uses color. And I'm just pausing to say hi to others who are joining us. I see Amy's here, and Melinda, and Tommy. Merry meet, everybody. Okay, now candle magic also incorporates color magic, which is why I paired it here. You would choose a color that aligns to your intention, or it can be just a white candle as well. That's an all-purpose color. You can carve magical symbols into the candle, words, names, anything regarding your intention. And candles can also be anointed with oils, which will then bring in herbal magic, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Now, what I did want to do for those who've never anointed a candle, I wanted to explain this. So I brought a taper candle here. Now, if we want to anoint the candle, we absolutely can anoint a candle that's already poured into a glass jar or a container, in which case you would just anoint the wick. But if you have a candle that is not inside of a jar already or a holder, you actually can do a lot more as you anoint this. So what I like to do is I actually like to use herbs to catalyze the intention of the spell. And so what I will do is I'll get an oil that I want to use with the spell, and then I will do some research and I'll find a few herbs that would also align to whatever my intention is. Now, when I anoint the oil, if this is a spell that's about drawing in, I'm typically going to anoint it clockwise. So I would take some oil between my fingers, and then starting in the center of the candle, I would just begin rubbing the oil into the candle, going all the way up to the wick in a clockwise motion. And then once I get to the wick, I would put some oil on the wick, and then I would come back to the center and then begin to go again, rubbing the oil into the candle in a clockwise motion until I get all the way down to the base of the candle. So when I'm done, this entire candle has been had the oil rubbed into it. You could stop there. That candle's now anointed. Or you can get a piece of paper, which is what I do, and then I sprinkle some of the herbs or powder or whatever it is I want to use to catalyze the spell. And then you'll roll the anointed candle in those herbs, which means that they will finally coat the edges of this candle. Now, when you burn the candle, what you'll find is it's exactly that. It's a catalyst. The candle will burn much quicker, but you're also using these other intentions or bringing these other energies into your working that are lending their aid. It's like compounding the effect of the spell. Now, if a person instead wanted to do a banishing spell, or there's something they're getting rid of, then what I would recommend is during the anointing process, instead of starting in the center and rubbing the oil in clockwise, you would start in the center and rub it in counterclockwise. So, and then you can put the herbs, roll it in the herbs just the same way. So very versatile kind of magic. Other, like I mentioned, other candles that are already poured into containers, you would just anoint the wick. So I did want to mention a little bit about like what do we do, a little bit more about the candle magic. So if you have already got it anointed, you have some herbs on it. If you want to use those, what you then can do is hold the candle, and sort of like we did with the braids or the knot magic, you would focus on your intention. You might speak it out loud. Speaking is always very good or singing in spells, because what it does is it activates the the throat chakra, which is our chakra of spiritual manifestation. So very good to kind of bring the voice into your spell work as well, but you could speak your intentions to the candle, or at least think them, charge it with your energy, and then you'll burn it. Now, you can burn the candle all the way down, monitor it, of course. I typically, if I'm going to do something like that, I'll put it in some kind of a fireproof container. I'll put it in my shower stall where I know even if it falls over, it's not going to cause a fire. A word on blowing out candles is that many witches will tell you it's sort of taboo to blow out candles. I honestly don't have a lot of rules in my craft. I think that your intention and kind of what you feel is the right way to do something, what you're called to, is often the right thing for you. But when it comes to blowing out candles, I'm pretty hard and fast on this one. Um, it tends to be perceived by the fire element as a bit, I think offensive might be a very strong word, but I'm going to use it anyway. A bit offensive to put out a candle using a different element. For example, to blow it out, we would have to use the element of air. So when we're doing a spell where we're using candles, I would suggest either wetting your thumb and your pointer finger and then just snuff it out with your fingers. Get a real candle snuffer. If it's in a jar, I'll just sometimes put a glass bowl over it to put it out that way. So anyway, just a word about blowing out candles. Many witches will probably agree with me. It's just something a practice that they sort of picked up. We just don't blow out candles. Okay, so that is candle magic. And anybody who's here live, feel free to put questions in the chat. We'll have a Q&A at the end, but I'm also following the chat as we go, okay, and answering questions as we go. Okay, that kind of segues us into herbal magic. You can see how these are all kind of intersecting. Now, in herbal magic, herbalism really is at the heart of traditional witchcraft. But I do want to say something, is that many times when new witches come and they are asking me questions, they have this whole long list of things that they want to get really good at, and herbalism's often on the list. And you're going to hear me talk. Herbalism is a whole entire thing in and of itself. It takes a lot of time and practice to study it. And so I would recommend, don't get wrapped up in getting everything perfect. But you can absolutely bring some herbs into your magic, and then if you decide that herbalism is a path that you want to specialize in, then find a good mentor, a good teacher, a good course, and really dive in and learn it really well from someone. Now, when it comes to herbalism, there's different forms of herbs that we can bring into our magic. There are potions. Christopher Penczak calls a potion a catch-all. He says it's a catch-all word for many of these other things we're going to talk about. Typically, a potion is a water-based infusion of some kind, and it's usually used externally to anoint yourself, to anoint ritual tools, to anoint objects in your spells. Now, that's opposed to a brew or a tincture, which would be meant to be taken internally. Now, a brew is kind of a fancy word for tea, right? We would take that internally, and then we would take in the magical properties of those herbs. An infusion is when we take the plant matter and we steep it in very, very hot water. So it's like making a tea, as opposed to a decoction where it's usually simmered on very low heat, which means that it's going to take a much longer time for it to simmer and to get the herb and the plant matter infused into the liquid. Sometimes, in fact, a decoction can then be placed in a refrigerator afterwards. It might sit there for some time. Now, tinctures usually have alcohol or some kind of a vinegar, like apple cider vinegar, added to them that will preserve them for longer. Tinctures are usually meant to be taken internally as well, but they don't necessarily have to be. And then the ointment is usually an oily preparation where the herbs are infused into this oily kind of salve, which then could be rubbed onto the skin or used topically. So just very many different ways that we could use herbalism in our magic. Now, probably the simplest thing, though, for somebody getting started and doesn't have a lot of experience in making all of these different things I just talked about, is just simply to use the loose herbs in your spell. So we've already talked about it. When I talked about rolling the candle in the loose herbs, that's already adding herbal magic to our magic. Now, something else that we can do is add the herbs to a charm, which we're going to be talking about very soon, or a charm bag of some kind. And and that is just probably one of the more accessible ways of using the herbs in your magic. Now, I do want to say a word of about herbalism, like I mentioned in the beginning of this part, is that it is a very intensive study. There's a difference between medicinal and magical herbalism. Especially if a person were wanting to go down the medicinal path, this is where I highly stress finding a teacher who has expertise in it, because herbs, just as it says, medicinal herbs, it's a study of medicine. This is a type of medicine that takes a lot of study, and you can really, as a witch who practiced magical herbalism for a long time, didn't really know a ton about medicinal herbalism. You can I don't want to use the word get in trouble necessarily, but you can have some unintended effects if you are taking a lot of herbs internally and you don't understand how to use them. And this happened to me because I had someone who I trusted who gave me advice. She wasn't an herbalist at all, gave me advice about some tea to take, and it really threw my whole system off. And kind of looking back on it, um, it's in some ways kind of irresponsible for people to give like medicinal herbal advice when they don't really know a lot about it, right? I was able to correct all that, kind of bring my body back into balance, but it took some time. Now, magical herbalism, on the other hand, where we're not taking anything internally, is much easier to use. This is why I think it's really good, much better for beginners. And then if you like herbalism, start going down the medicinal path. Okay, so let's move into charm magic, because I mentioned that here. So charm magic, virtually anything can be charged in order to make it into a charm. You can charge your jewelry. You can charge anything that's like handcrafted. You could make a charm out of paper, wood, clay, herbs, stones, anything really. We can wrap wire around things to connect them, but anything really can be used to make a charm. Now, one of my favorite ways to use charm magic is through the sachet. So I mentioned earlier, I've always loved braided, knot, and cord magic, and I've always loved sachet magic. So this one's kind of small. I don't know if you'll be able to see it very well, but this is a little sachet that I made actually a couple of years ago in an online ritual that I led that was supposed to be to help people kind of instill courage and self-belief in people. Now, when you make a sachet, what you'll usually do is get a piece of cloth, a ribbon, and then whatever you're going to put in the sachet. So if it's different herbs that are connected to your intention, stones, people can write sigils, which we're going to talk about some sigil magic in a bit too, but you could write sigils or symbols on pieces of paper, insert those in here. You could write your full intention in there. Money, different things that you found, acorns, different things you found out in nature. Anything really can go in the sachet. Now, it's also kind of interesting. You go to like Joann's or Michael's, even at Walmart, I've seen this where they sell the scraps of fabric that are already cut into like little squares. They're literally made for sachets. That's not the purpose of them, but for a witch, it's like a bonanza, right? Because it's all these little pieces of cloth that's already cut out to make your sachets. And so you'll just spread the cloth out. You put all of the materials into it. Just like any of this, we can then charge it with our intention. Think your intention, speak it out loud, sing it out loud. And then afterwards, when you're ready, then you will fold it all up and then you'll tie it with a ribbon. Now, this can be hung somewhere. This particular one just sits on the altar, but I have some hung above doors here. You could put it in your car if it was like a protection sachet. And we haven't talked a lot about intention, but literally any of these types of magic I'm talking about can be used for any type of intention. So like this is like, let's say it was a car protection sachet, then we'd put it in the car. You could make one and put it in your kid's backpack to protect them when they go out to school and around in the world. So I just really love this form of magic because it's so easy, it's so accessible. Now let's segue into sigil magic next. Now sigil magic, it translates our intention that's spoken in words into a free form magical symbol. So when we are creating a sigil, we want to start with a clear and positive intention that's usually in the present tense. So I've demonstrated this before, but for anybody who's never seen it, wants a refresher, or is brand new here, we'll start with an intention. So I'm starting with, I have a new prosperous job. Okay, this is just an intention. So obviously we have it in present tense, it's positive, right? We say it as though it's already happened. Now, when we're creating the sigil, what we will then do is we will take the phrase that we created and we're going to cross out all of the vowels first, and then you're going to cross out all of the letters that repeat themselves. So at the end, you really should only be left with a few letters. In this case, it was kind of a longer intention. So we were left with 6 different letters that either were not vowels or they didn't repeat somewhere else in the intention. Now from there, this is where you can get creative, and you will take those letters and you begin to make some kind of a symbol. Now I did this very quickly right before this recording, and so I just kind of threw them together. The idea here is that no one would be able to look at this and say to you, "Oh yeah, that says I have a new prosperous job," but you know that it's there. You know the intention is already embedded in it through all the work that you did. Now you can also get very creative and you can take parts of the letters apart. So for example, the B, right, is made of like one line and 2 little curves, and you can take all that apart and you can make any design that you want using all of these parts. So really great form of magic. Like I mentioned, you could make a sigil and then you could put it in your sachet if you wanted. What people will typically do next is they'll charge the sigil. Just like any of this, there's usually some kind of a charging of it with our intention, which just means you're infusing it with your intention. For those who are newer, it just means holding it and focusing your intention into the object. You have a lot of power to just direct your will there. And then from there, traditionally, a sigil would be burned if it was a destructible one. And that's probably the most traditional thing that people will do. So they'll make it, they'll charge it, and then they will burn it, and then you forget about it. It's just like sending the energy out into the universe. Okay, I did it, and now we wait for the return. Now, other people may make a temporary or a permanent sigil. A temporary sigil would be perhaps you could draw it on your body and use it and wear it when you need it, wash it off in the shower when you're done. Other people like to make permanent ones where they might put it under a mattress of the bed, behind a picture frame, maybe in the glove box of the car. And these are just not meant to be destructible. They're just meant to always be there. Now, there's no right or wrong to which one is the right way. Traditionally, people burn them, but permanent and temporary sigils are also used. Okay, so that is going to move me into sympathetic magic. Now, sympathetic magic is ritually, symbolically acting out our intention. In some ways, you probably are starting very much to see the overlap between all of these types of magic and how we might be using more than one at a time. So sympathetic magic utilizes the law of correspondences. So what we affect in the microcosm, which is us and the world around us, will affect the macrocosm and vice versa. So as below, so above, as above, so below. That's where those phrases come from. Now, the idea behind the law of correspondences is that things that look similar tend to carry similar intentions and energies. So an example of sympathetic magic would be cutting a cord for separation. So you're symbolically doing something to show I'm cutting it here physically, I'm cutting this cord physically, but my intention is to cut off a relationship with a person or a connection to a place, a job, different things like that. Another example of sympathetic magic would be planting or cultivating seeds to symbolize growth. So you plant the seeds to symbolize your own growth. You start as a seed, and eventually as you water that plant and you care for that plant, you're also caring for your own growth. Another example would be using look-alike objects, which is probably one of the more common ways that a person would use sympathetic magic. So for example, eggs being used in fertility magic, right? Because to symbolize the eggs that are inside of a person that would get them pregnant, right? Or perhaps we would use a walnut to symbolize brain health or intellect or intelligence. Maybe it's a spell where somebody's studying for a big exam and they want to really boost their brain power, and they use a walnut in their spell. Perhaps they put it in a sachet and carry it with them to the class. Now, probably the most popular of all types of sympathetic magic is the poppet doll. The poppet doll is where I'll show a couple of these here. So I particularly like these ones because they are like for shadow work. So we have the shadow, so the shadow here, and then we have kind of the light side of the person. And energy directed towards the poppet doll will affect it. Now, this is why they're often used in healing magic. And I know that everyone's heard of using voodoo dolls as well. And they can be used to actually direct less than healing magic towards other people. But what I really love about the poppet too is you can make one of these, and then you can, like, let's say a person has a problem with their heart, and you can direct energy here and lovingly fill this area on the doll with good intention. And then the idea is that that then transfers to the person. Now, in the past, our coven, this is years and years ago, we actually made inner child dolls, which were very interesting. And people kind of made wounds on the dolls where they felt they needed to work, and then we could work with those later. But it's just a really a fun way. I mean, and these don't take a lot of work. It was just felt that was sewed together, and then some symbols were drawn on it. But just a really great way to have a connection to another person or yourself. You can make one for yourself as well as you're working towards the healing and directing healing energy towards them. So that is about the bulk of kind of the main ones I wanted to talk about tonight, but I did want to mention a few other types of magic that frequently come up for people. This is not an exhaustive list, so believe me, afterwards you can go Google it and there will be others that I didn't talk about, but I'm trying to cover the main ones that most people would ask about. So another form of magic is elemental magic. And elemental magic can be used during any of this. So for example, I mentioned, where's my cord here? I've lost my witch's ladder somehow. But my witch's ladder has, here it is. My witch's ladder, like I mentioned, has little charms tied into it to represent the different elements. So I was already bringing some elemental magic into this. Now, you will work with the 4 elements during elemental magic to harness their properties. And sometimes during your elemental magic, maybe you're only working with one. So perhaps you're doing some work on courage, right? So a person may choose to only work with fire during that. A person who was trying to connect to the divine feminine might instead decide that they're going to work with the element of water. And then in other instances, you might decide you're going to call in all 4 elements, and perhaps you'll even call in the 5th element, spirit. But really, the elemental magic is just simply bringing the elements into your magic. And you can layer that on top of any of these other forms of magic that you choose to. Now, divination magic is where we use tarot, runes, scrying, any form of divination to gain insight or to receive guidance. And so divination can be a form of magic in and of itself, or it can be part of a ritual. So sometimes what people will do is after they do the spells, or I even counsel people to do divination before you do the spell. Ask your preferred form of divination, what will happen if I do the spell? What will happen if I don't do the spell? And then afterwards, you can also do divination to kind of see what's the pathway now. What's the next action that I should take? So it can be used together with any of these other spells or type of magic that you're doing. Now, another thing I really love is just I like using tarot in spells. And this book, I found it, and I frequently recommend this book to other people. This is Tarot Spells by Janina Renee. This book is from 1998. It's probably one of the first books I ever got. And it goes through all these different layouts that you can use. It's not really about divining from the cards, but actually using the cards as catalysts to move our intentions out into the universe. So we'll go through and it'll give you little rituals that you can do that you can add on to the spread. And then you lay down the cards and you meditate and you send your intention out into the universe. So I love this book. I highly recommend it, especially if you're someone who's really loves tarot. This is a totally different way of working with magic through tarot spells. So love that book. Now, another form of magic is shadow magic. Sometimes people think that shadow magic is something different than what it is. Shadow magic is usually working with the shadow self or kind of the unconscious parts of the psyche to reveal things that are there in order to forward our healing, our self-discovery, our integration of the parts of ourselves that we've rejected. I think that shadow magic is fantastic for people who are on that kind of self-healing, self-discovery path. But I also think it's good for anyone, because if we start to remove blockages, if we start to understand ourselves better, then we become better at our magic. So which know thyself, one of the best ways to know thyself is through shadow magic and doing shadow work. And then what you find is that it will accelerate the rest of this because you don't have all that extra stuff that you're carrying that you're not aware of. Your energy can then be focused on what you really want, which is your intentions. Another type of magic is crystal magic. And again, this could be incorporated into other things, like crystals can be put in the sachets. They can be, if they have little findings on them, they can be weaved into your witch's ladder. Crystals can be worn on the body. They can be carried. They can be put under the pillow during sleep. They can be incorporated into any spells that we talked about. You could make a crystal grid out of them. Essentially, crystal magic is just tapping into the properties of these stones and crystals for your magic. Now, a couple other types to talk about. Ceremonial magic, sometimes called high magic, is a part of Western esotericism, Hermeticism, usually characterized by like kind of an intricate ceremony with ritual accessories that are mandatory. And so of all the types of magic, this is one that's pretty strict. Like there aren't a lot of substitutions. The spells and the rituals are written in a way that are meant to be practiced in exactly that way. And in fact, if words are said the wrong way, pronounced differently, there's this idea that it can change the outcome of the magic. To me, ceremonial magic is a type of magic that you really do need to study. You need to read some books and really get to know it. I would probably recommend finding someone who practices it too, so you can learn it really well from them. It's really beyond the talk of tonight's scope of tonight's talk, but there are a couple of books for those who are interested in exploring it. Llewellyn's Complete Book of Ceremonial Magic is a good jumping off point because it goes through a summary of different forms of high magic and ceremonial magic, where it all comes from. But another book that I like, if you're a Christopher Penczak fan like me, is he does have a book in his Temple series called The Temple of High Witchcraft. And so this does go into the witch's Kabbalah, which is often used in ceremonial magic. And it goes into just practices, ceremonies of high magic and ceremonial magic. So you might enjoy that if you're a Penczak fan and you're interested in ceremonial magic. And then, of course, there's also chaos magic. Chaos magic usually promotes a lot of experimentation, play, creativity in the practice of it. Instead of adopting kind of inherited patterns, rituals, it would be kind of like high magic, ceremonial magic, where everything is prescribed and written out for you. Chaos magic is very different. It's where kind of it's up to the practitioner to kind of build the foundation from the ground up. What it does is essentially rejects the patterns and the methods of these other types of magic, and instead encourages the practitioner to build their own practice from scratch. So overall, like I mentioned, this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but I feel that it covers some of the most popular forms. It's also important to remember that you don't have to pick one kind of magic. And you may find that when you do a spell, let's say you're doing a spell for healing, and you decide you want to make a sachet and a poppet, right? And then let's say you're doing a spell for abundance and you decide you want to do a witch's ladder. Perhaps you're doing a spell for protection and you want to do some candle magic and a sigil. So witches can move. There are no rules here, right? So we can move fluidly through these different types of and forms of magic, and sometimes we'll use multiple ones at once. So for example, we could use color, charms, and candles all wrapped up into one spell. All right, so I hope that helps. I hope it answers some of the questions about what types of magic are there, and especially for those who are newer and are not really sure how to put together a spell. I hope that gives you some ideas. Okay, so I am going to kind of segue into the Q&A. If you are here with me live, you can feel free to drop questions in the chat, and I will answer any of those. And they does not have to be about types of magic. It could be anything related to witchcraft, energy work, and shadow work. So I did have one question that came in kind of right before the episode tonight. And Heidi was asking about kind of working with the lunar cycles. And so what I decided to do is, I was already planning this anyway, is to do another episode on lunar cycles, working with them in both kind of our magical and our mundane lives. So next week we are going to dive deeply into that. But to answer the question tonight, working with the lunar cycles to me is all about learning how you yourself experience that lunar energy and the changes that happen as the cycle progresses. So what I mean by this is that some people feel differently during different parts of the cycle. So traditionally, people will feel kind of amplified near the full moon, and they may feel more restive and reflective near the new and the dark moons. But that's not the case for everyone, and it's also not the case for an individual from cycle to cycle. So for me, sometimes I notice that during the full moon, I do feel full of a lot of energy and very creative. And, the moon is at the peak of its power, and so I just kind of feel in my own. And then at the dark moon, I'll feel more reflective, like I want to do some inward work. But other times, I'll feel like I have a lot of amplified energy at the dark moon, and I'll feel like more resting, like I feel like I want to rest during the full moon. So for this reason, I think it's very important for anyone who really does want to get to know the lunar energies and how they work for them individually, is to keep a moon cycle journal for a couple of months, several cycles, because otherwise you won't have the time to see the patterns. It's very easy. What you do is you'll find a site that can provide you this with the exact phase that the moon is in at that time. And I will put one in the chat here. Let me actually see if I can do it right now. So this is the one I do, and it is set for my local time zone here. But you can change it to your time zone. You can also change the year if you want. So that is the first step of keeping the lunar cycle journal. So you would, every single day, you would write down what phase the moon is in. So like today, for example, we're nearing the end of the lunar cycle. This is the beginning of the balsamic phase, which means we're 3 days away from the new moon. This is part of the waning crescent. And so a person would write down waning crescent in their journal. And if they knew that it was also the start of the balsamic moon, they would also write that down. From there, you then want to just quickly, this should only take you a minute or so, write down a few words about how you're feeling emotionally, energetically, and physically. And that's it. And you don't have to analyze any of it. You just write it down. You're just basically keeping a log. And you'll do that for a couple of cycles, and eventually you'll be able to look back at the patterns. And it can be very eye-opening. People will start to see, I'm kind of energized during the first quarter. And sometimes that can actually be tied to the phase that the moon was in when you were born. So that's also something interesting to look at, is Google what if you don't know this, but Google what phase was the moon in on, and then put your birth date and year and see what comes up. And people may notice that they feel a certain way when the moon is in the phase it was in when they were born. But overall, what this is going to do is it's going to help create an intimate or more intimate relationship with the moon. Now, the other thing I would recommend for somebody who is wants to kind of work with the cycles, the lunar cycles, is to have something to kind of ritualize the turning of the lunar cycle. So what I do is I keep these candles on my altar back here. So they're these like tall prayer candles. I get a new set at the new moon and I anoint them and light them on that day. And then every single night I burn them down a little bit until finally I'll burn them all the way down in the dark moon. And I start over on the next new moon. And it's a very simple way to just kind of ritualize the passing of the lunar cycle. For me, it was one of these practices I brought in when I was feeling very disconnected from anything. And I know that from talking to people, sometimes people feel that as well. And it's just a way to be doing something very simple, because literally, what does it do? It takes like 1 second to light the candle and then another second to come back and put it out later. But it's this way that you're kind of acknowledging that the energy is turning, right? And that the new moon creates a new part of the cycle. So that can be a very powerful way to just connect to the lunar cycle. But I will next week, we'll be going into much greater depth on the lunar cycles and how we can use the different phases of the moon for magic and for our mundane lives as well. Okay, so I hope that helps to answer the question. Anybody here who's got anything they want to ask, we have plenty of time. I don't see anything in the chat yet, but in the meantime, I'm going to just tell you a little bit more about what is coming up next. So like I said, on 7/9, we're going to be talking about working with the lunar cycles. And then on 7/16, I haven't fully decided, but I did an episode on the witch's pyramid, which kind of connects to the different elements. I did that like a year and a half ago, and I'd like to revisit that discussion because I think it was a really fun talk, and a lot of people don't even know what the witch's pyramid is. So I think we'll be revisiting that on 7/16. On 7/23, I do not have an episode planned, so if anybody has some ideas, I always love hearing different recommendations of what you'd like to learn more about. And I also wanted to mention that if you are not already enrolled in our Demystifying Witchcraft course, it is going to be opening up soon. We had some people who from our membership who joined it or who signed up for that course, and they've been taking it and really enjoying it, but we're about to bring it to the public. And so if you're somebody who's a new witch, who's really doesn't know anything, it's a perfect course for you. It's based on my trainings that I do in my online coven when I initiate people. But it's also a really good course for those who've never had any formal training before, or even somebody who's been on the path for a while and they just want to brush up on things. Everything's all in one place. So there's no like having to Google things and have all the scattered information everywhere. It's a course. It's a 24. I believe there's about 24 hours of course material in that or recorded material in that course. So look for that. That should be coming out soon, sometime in July. We're expecting it, at least by the end of July, we should have that course launched for you. So I don't see anything, any questions in the chat, and I'm not sure if that's because there's nothing here or Facebook is just kind of pulling this on me again. But if I've missed anybody's questions, I will definitely go back and try to catch those afterwards because I don't want to lose anybody's questions. All right, so I am going to I'm going to sign off for tonight. I hope that people have a great rest of their evening, and I will be back with you next Tuesday for our next episode on working with the lunar cycles. I also, if you are watching this live or anybody in replay, leave a heart or a thumbs up. It helps us get this out to the feet of more people. And if you are not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, Body Mind Witchcraft, make sure to subscribe there so you won't miss any future episodes, because all of these replays are put up on our YouTube afterwards. All right, until next time, blessed be.